If you want to support my channel, please consider to check out my Patreon. Everyone who pledges to me will be added to my Discord. Higher tiers can also request me to review pretty much anything. If you don't want to bother with Patreon, you can also commission video reviews directly from me. For more information, check out the description below. I'm not quite sure what to make out of this. In my last Gumball review, I talked about how the job deconstructed the status quo. Now, in the season 2 finale, you could say that they go into the opposite direction. It starts innocently enough, with the Watterson reminiscing over their past experience over the family album. At first it seems like their show is simply spoofing the concept of a clip show episode. That pest of an episode where nothing really happens besides the recycling of as many old clips as possible. Now with the rise of home media and internet streaming, they thankfully became somewhat of a rarity, and I haven't seen any show playing that straight in ages. If you see it in a TV show nowadays, you can usually be sure that they poke fun at the concept more than anything else. Unless we are talking about anime. Heck, they even still produce fucking compilation movies in Japan. And you know what? I think Gumball spoofing the concept of a clip show would have probably been enough to make a funny episode. But they took it 4 steps further, because suddenly everything they did throughout the show comes back to bite them. Not only is this episode full of callbacks to prior episodes, they also have to deal with their consequences. And pretty much for everything, no matter how big or small. Suddenly the Wattersons are in debt and they even end up in jail. Every attempt to fix the situation fails. This comes with a lot of lampshading that usually everything just kinda works out for them in the end, or that even if they have to deal with the consequences, they never quite stick. Like when Richard explains that he has been to jail before, but then he just wasn't anymore. Now the job was all about preserving the status quo. It takes the point that nothing can ever change and everything has to go back to normal by the end of an episode. The finale tackles a related but different topic. The concept of negative continuity. Admittedly, those tropes often go hand in hand, yet they are in the end fundamentally different. The status quo's God approach is more of a sensible approach. Nothing ever happens that results in a drastic change to the general setup of a show. Should something happen that results in change, something else will happen to negate it, restoring the status quo. Just taking the job as an example, Richard gets a job. This would mean he wouldn't be at home all the time and that the Wattersons would have more money to spend. But by the end of the episode, Richard loses his money, restoring the status quo, and the show never has to bring it up again. So it's more of a case of continuity doesn't really matter. Negative continuity is different, as continuity is outright ignored. The status quo is restored without any explanation, even when it doesn't make any sense. Basically, if Richard still had his job at the end of the job, without the universe exploding obviously, but suddenly wouldn't have it in the very next episode without any further explanation, this would be an example of negative continuity. It's a more forceful approach to restoring the status quo, if you so will. Now the finale plays with the concept by saying yes, everything that happened in previous episode actually happened and no one has forgotten anything. And now the Wattersons have to deal with the consequences of their actions. This extends to every single joke as well. Stuff that wasn't even addressed in the episode it happened in suddenly has consequences. Even shows with a strong continuity often have their characters do something funny without any consequences for the sake of a joke. So in a way, Gumball becomes hyper-realistic here. And well, there's a lot of fun to be had with this episode. It's pretty hilarious. Now with all these callbacks to prior episodes, you might think that this would mean that you can only understand the job if you have watched all of Gumball up to this point. Well, let me assure you that this is not the case. While you probably get a few more kicks out of it if you understand every passing reference, it should be kept in mind that this episode doesn't follow any singular plot point, but rather deals with the overall behavior of the Wattersons. Half of the stuff they allude to in this episode could have been made up for this episode, and it wouldn't make any difference. For the record, since I didn't watch all Gumball episodes myself, I can't tell you for sure if there are some points they made up. But like I said, it doesn't really matter. Now, after the Wattersons fail to make things better with their rather reckless actions, and end up in jail, they decide that the only logical course of actions now is to make things even worse. There's a certain logic to it. Trying to make things better obviously doesn't work, and they are used for things to work out somehow once the situation gets bad enough. However, this also doesn't work. And the Watersons get cornered in their house, with Gumball commenting that the only thing that could save them is reality resetting itself. Which is when the episode just ends without any resolution whatsoever, and of course, nothing that happens in this episode is ever addressed again. At least I think that's the case. If it has been followed up in a later season somehow, let me know, but I kinda doubt it. So yeah, the episode itself, even though it defies the concept of negative continuity, makes use of it. It makes itself an example of what it is a parody of, if you so will, which sort of emphasizes a point it is trying to make. Well, actually there isn't really a point this episode is trying to make. It is not like there is any sort of criticism involved, it only lampshades it and has some fun with it. You could say that the show shows how the show would be if it was quote unquote realistic and the Watersons had to deal with the consequences of their actions. It's a parody of general TV conventions and a pretty funny parody at that. With that being said, let's wrap things up. The finale is a hilarious episode. Like The Job, it is pretty self-aware and a great meta-comedy, which is what Gumball probably does best. You could say that The Amazing World of Gumball is a cartoon about living inside a cartoon. The only thing that would be more meta is if they would start breaking the fourth wall and talk with the writers directly. So yeah, if you haven't watched this episode already, I would recommend to give it a shot. But what about you? Did you like this episode? Anything that bothered you? Let me know in the comments below. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well.